waiting for her with his gun behind the door. What does she do? What did they do? They offer them up to $100. Okay, $100 for you if you answer my questions. How much honesty can you expect in those interviews? Not much. And therefore, when you look at the results, it shows. Okay? So for example, some of the results are a little striking, to say the least. For example, almost 0.5% of men between the ages of 80 and 84 claim to have a regular sexual partner. Have you seen lately an 84-year-old man? Have you? Seems to me like people are projecting what they wish rather than what they did. And also, for example, that men claim to have many more sexual partners than women. So you get the picture that men are always having fun out there, and women are like never, like doing anything. And then I have this article here, which you have on Moodle as well. It's called Sex, Lies, and Social Science, in which you find a really interesting critique of the University of Chicago study by a Harvard professor, R.C. Lewontin. And so this is the analysis he makes of this discrepancy between how many sexual partners men and women have. He says, discounting homosexual partners, the average number of sex partners reported by men must be equal to the average number reported by women. This is a variant on the economist Robert Solow's observation that the only law in economics is that the number of sales must be equal to the number of purchases. Yet, in this study by the University of Chicago, and other studies like it, men report many more partners than women, roughly 75% more. Now, what is the explanation that the researchers gave for this huge discrepancy? Well, there were 7 possible explanations they gave. Number 1, that maybe American men are having sex out of the country, mostly. Go to Canada, Mexico, something. Or maybe that many of them are having sex with prostitutes. So a few women are having a lot of sex with all the men, most other women are not. Anyway, it's only explanation number 6 that maybe they're lying. Maybe they're lying. Well, it seems to me this says a lot about the way science is done. I mean, this professor, Lewontin, Harvard professor of biology, ends up by saying, which I think is very enlightening, he says, it is frightening to think that social science is in the hands of professionals who are so deaf to human nuance that they believe that people do not lie, first of all, to themselves about the most frightening aspects of their own lives, and that they have no interest in manipulating the impression that strangers have of them. It is frightening to think that science One, two, three. Okay, and now we go back to Dean Hamer's genetic study on homosexuality. Remember, I said we're going to leave that for later when we reviewed too loud. So I want to. So will I just have walk closer to the camera?
Yeah.
Okay, now for those of you who are watching the lecture on tape, you may notice a little bit of a difference in the quality of sound. It's because we are having some little technical problem, but hopefully you'll be able to get a decently good quality. So I'm just gonna speak closer to the camera so you get better sound, okay? We're gonna go back to the study by Dean Hamer, the study on genetics, the theory of the genetic origin of homosexuality. Remember I talked about that at the beginning of the lecture and I said we're going to keep this for later. Well, we're going to go back to it now. And we're going to see the flaws in the study. That is important because that is again, for us, an illustration of an issue with the ethics of scientific research. Now, Dean Hamer claimed to have found the gene that causes or passes on homosexuality because he found that homosexuality appeared to cluster in the family histories of homosexual men. So there were many homosexual men in whose families, many homosexual men.
Fixed it.
Well, now we have a better sound again. So now I can drag. All right, so back to Dean Hamer. Okay. So he thought he found more homosexual men in the family trees of most homosexual men, while in the family trees of heterosexual men, he found fewer homosexual men. There is even a problem with that way of looking at things because obviously that wouldn't apply, his observations wouldn't apply to all homosexual men. The ones he found in the family trees of heterosexual men wouldn't have too many other homosexual relatives. But even if we take it at face value, how did he make his observations? Well, he would interview homosexual men and ask them, how many men in your families you think are gay? And then he would interview heterosexual men and ask them the same question, how many men in your families you think are gay? Now, the kinds of answers he got were different in the ones and in the others. Homosexual men tended to see many more gay men in their families than heterosexual men. But the reason may simply be, you can't take people's word as face value like that. Homosexual men, for one reason, may be themselves more able to see other or to recognize signs of homosexuality in other men, for example. Okay? And not only that, they may also have some wishful thinking as far as seeing more gay men than there really are. So the gay man would go, yeah, my Uncle John, yeah, my cousin Peter, yeah, I think they would see all of them who were really homosexual, and even those who were not, out of their wishful thinking, they might increase the number of homosexual men in their families. While heterosexual men, on the other hand, might fall precisely on the opposite side. They might not recognize other gay men in their families. Yeah, my Uncle Peter, well, he's a little funny, but no, he's not gay. This kind of thing. They might not recognize gay men who were really gay, and of course they would tend to see fewer than they really were. So, what people say, you cannot be taken as face value. That's number one. But then the major problem with his study, he's talking about being a far more gay men than the average in the family trees of homosexual men than in the family trees of heterosexual men. But what is the average? What is the incidence of homosexuality? That is a major problem. Unless you know that, how can you compare that to anything? How can you say that there are many more than the average or fewer than the average if you don't know what the average is? And he didn't know. Okay, so we're done with the scientific part. Now, before we move on to the religious part of the discussion, let me ask you a question. How many of you think that gay marriage should not be allowed? Well, we have a pretty liberal class. everyone agrees